The curtains were drawn, cloaking the Lecky mansion's grand living room in a twilight hush. Rain tapped faintly against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sound muffled by imported glass and thick velvet drapes. A chandelier glittered above, catching the occasional flash of headlights outside, though none ever stopped. Ariella sat on the cream leather couch, spine straight, legs crossed at the ankles. Her fingers rested lightly on her lap, unmoving. She wore a silk blouse, pearl earrings, and oversized dark sunglasses that hid the bruising truth beneath. The stillness in her body wasn't elegance. Tonight it was calculation. Across the room, Nathan paced like a man with too much energy and nowhere to spend it. His voice bounced off the walls, too loud, too free. "You just need to be patient, Tari. Don't start again, please." He had his back to her, one hand gesturing wildly, the other clutching the phone to his ear like a lifeline. His words were clipped, urgent. "She doesn't know yet. She's in shock. They told her it could be temporary, but I don't think." So, the doctors weren't hopeful. Ariella's fingers twitched barely. A breath, sharp and quiet, slipped past her lips. Nathan didn't notice. "She's blind now, completely, can't see a damn thing. You have no idea how much that changes the game." He laughed, and it was soft and mean and unfamiliar. "She's nothing without her power, baby. Her instincts, her vision literally and otherwise, that's what made her who she is. She built the company on that now." A pause. "Now she's just a name. Just keep holding on, Tari. Soon it'll all be ours." The words struck like glass breaking in the quiet. Ariella's chin lifted half an inch. She didn't cry, didn't flinch. She only inhaled slowly, the way one might when trying to remember the shape of something lost. Her blindness wasn't total. Not quite. There were shadows, grays, and outlines. A smudge where a lamp stood, a flicker of movement where her husband paced. But what she lacked in vision, she compensated for with clarity. She could see him now more than ever. Nathan ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and finally turned toward her. "You should rest," he said gently, stepping closer, his voice dripping with curated concern. "You need to conserve your strength." Ariella tilted her head toward the sound of him. "Of course," she murmured, voiced soft as velvet. "You're right, Nathan. I see that now." He smiled, relieved. She smiled too, but he couldn't see the steel behind it. Ariella Okoye had never been handed anything easily. Born to a seamstress mother in the crowded heart of Ajagunal, her earliest memories were of candlelit nights, hunched over school books, while the sounds of generators and life hummed outside. Her mother Amaka raised her with an unflinching belief in discipline, prayer, and the power of perseverance. Ariella listened. She studied relentlessly, built her way through scholarships and small coding gigs, and eventually created Tessellate, the data infrastructure startup that now powered half of West Africa's fintech backbone. She was a visionary, sharp, innovative, and ferociously loyal. But beneath the title of CEO and the Forbes Africa features, Ariella had always been that little girl longing for partnership, for someone to anchor her when the weight of the world got too loud. That someone, she thought, had been Nathan. They met in their late 20s, when her startup was still working out of a shared office space in Yaba, and he was a smooth-talking real estate consultant with big dreams and no capital. Nathan had a kind smile, an easy laugh, and an uncanny way of making her feel seen. For Ariella, who had known only transactional relationships with men up until then, his charm was a bomb. He believed in her when investors didn't. showed up when no one else did, and when she started making real money, she returned the faith. Tenfold, she invested in his ventures, stood beside him at every failed pitch, covered their bills when his deals fell through. It didn't matter. They were building something together. But now, 10 years into the marriage, the foundation was beginning to crack. There were no children years of fertility treatments, endless doctor visits, hormone shots, and bruised dreams had left her raw. Nathan had been supportive at first, even hopeful, but somewhere between the third failed IVF and the expansion of her company into 5 African markets, something in him began to fade. His laughter grew rare. The warmth in his eyes when he looked at her dulled. He began traveling more, coming home later, retreating into cold silences that Ariella, for a while, mistook for stress. Now, at 38, Ariella was exhausted, burnt out. She lived in power meetings and private jets, but her body was protesting. Chronic migraines blurred her vision. The nausea hit like waves, and sometimes, in the middle of a presentation, she could feel the edges of the room disappear. Her board had started to whisper behind closed doors, urging her to take medical leave, to rest before the inevitable collapse. But Ariella's instincts, the very gut that built an empire, were screaming about something else entirely. It wasn't just burnout, it was betrayal. She confided in only one person, Idara. Idara had been there since childhood, her next-door neighbor, her voice of reason, her unofficial sister. Now she was the company's lead legal counsel and Ariella's fiercest protector. They met over late-night wine in Ariella's study, when the lights were low and the masks could come off. Ariella told her about the whispers she heard when Nathan thought she was asleep, about the passwords changed on their shared accounts, the new cologne she smelled on his clothes, the lingering perfume in his car. She told her about the way his eyes slid away when she tried to reach him, how she could feel him checking out even as he played the devoted husband in public. "He's hiding something," Ariella said quietly, swirling her wine glass. "I can feel it in my bones." Idara didn't argue. She leaned back, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "Then dig," she said, "or walk. But don't sit in this halfway hell." But Ariella wasn't ready to walk. Not yet. She needed to know if any of him had ever been real. Had he loved her, ever? Or had he simply loved proximity to power, the lifestyle, the influence that came with being her husband? Ariella wasn't afraid of heartbreak. She had survived worse. But the idea that she had poured herself into a lie, that the one person she had chosen to build with had been building an exit all along, that was the wound she couldn't name yet. That was the truth she wasn't ready to see, but she would. The diagnosis was a carefully crafted illusion, one Ariella orchestrated with precision and pain. After another episode of blinding migraines and temporary vision loss, she met with Dr. Yume, her longtime neurologist, in a sterile private suite downtown. The truth was simple. The tests were inconclusive. Stress was ravaging her body, but nothing was definitively wrong. Still, Ariella leaned in across the desk, her voice calm but steely. "Then let's give them something definite." Together with Idara's legal oversight and silent support, they constructed a story. Functional blindness, a rare trauma-induced condition that could be temporary, but in some cases, permanent. Just enough to explain the dark glasses, the slowed pace, the need for assistance. Only the doctor and Idara knew the truth. Ariella could see just enough to navigate shadows, movement, outlines, but not clearly, not yet, and not them. When she returned home, the mansion felt colder. She arrived in a discreet medical van, wearing oversized sunglasses and flanked by a gentle, middle-aged nurse named Flora, hired to play the role of caregiver. Nathan came down the stairs with a furrowed brow and open arms, his voice laced with concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Baby, you're home," he said, hugging her too quickly, like a man eager to get through the performance. But the shock on his face was unmistakable. And then, a flicker of excitement, greedy, ugly, thinly veiled behind a mask of sympathy. It washed over him like a tide he didn't expect, and Ariella saw it before he could suppress it. That was when she knew her instincts were not wrong. He hadn't just fallen out of love, he was planning something. In the days that followed, the house changed. Nathan became suspiciously kind, too attentive in front of Flora, too quiet when alone with Ariella. At night, when he thought she was asleep, he whispered on the phone in their bathroom, his voice low but urgent. "No, she really can't see. Not even shadows. Tari, it's like a gift." Ariella, lying in bed with her back to him, let the words stab at her ribcage like glass. She began recording the calls, her phone tucked beneath her pillow, set to silent. Money transfers began disappearing from joint accounts. Luxury watches, rare paintings, and even a few of her startups. Confidential documents vanished, funneled to obscure holding accounts. She tracked it all in silence. Then came TAR. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon with a duffel bag, all legs and lip gloss, introduced with the lie that made Ariella's stomach turn. "This is Tari. She's here to help while you adjust. Cooking, laundry, errands, a live-in assistant, hired help." Ariella almost laughed, almost screamed, but instead she smiled weakly and nodded, pretending to fumble for Flora's hand for guidance. Tari played her part well, bowing respectfully, calling her ma, speaking in syrupy tones. But late at night, when they thought Ariella was tucked away in her room, she heard Tari's laughter echo through the hallway, heard the clinking of wine glasses, heard Nathan's voice, warm in a way he hadn't sounded in years. Their room there, one she shared with her husband, now hosted his infidelity like an open secret. And she, the blind woman, was meant to be none the wiser. Every day was a performance. Ariella had never imagined this kind of humiliation, being walked past by her husband and his mistress as though she were a fragile relic in her own home. Sometimes she felt her body go rigid from the ache of pretending. Other times, she caught herself whispering her pain into the silence of her bathroom, just to hear her own voice say it. But she endured, because now she had something better than rage. She had clarity. Nathan wasn't just cheating, he was plotting. And if he believed her powerless, helpless, sightless, then he'd show his full hand. So she waited, she listened, she recorded. Every betrayal, every whisper, every lie, because the game had begun, and Ariella had no intention of losing Nathan's. Cruelty didn't arrive all at once, dripped in slowly, deliberately, like poison in water. At first, it was subtle, a new cologne that replaced the scent she used to love on him, a slow fade in his voice when he addressed her, the absence of her name on his lips. Then came the perfume, her perfume delicately sprayed on Tari the first time. Tari leaned in to hand Ariella a glass of water. The scent hit her like a slap. It was unmistakable, the same Ambrand musk blend Ariella had worn for years. It clung to Tari's skin mockingly, a fragrant insult meant to cut deeper than words. Ariella said nothing. She nodded graciously, her hand grazing the glass, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. Inside, her heart blistered. Nathan became bolder in his deceit, pressing harder against the boundaries of her dignity. Over dinner one evening, he brought up legal concerns, his tone soft, careful. "Babe, with everything going on, your condition and all, maybe we should put some safeguards in place, a power of attorney, just so I can help manage things for you. Temporarily, of course." He smiled, voice full of concern that no longer fooled her. "You know, just in case anything gets worse." Ariella blinked slowly, pretending to strain at the blurry outline of his face. "Whatever you think is best," she murmured. Her voice didn't waver. Her mask never cracked. But that night, she called Idara and whispered every word into her confidante's ear. Idara's rage was immediate, blistering. We should go public, file papers, expose him, now. But Ariella was resolute. Not yet. Let him show me who he really is. Let him burn the whole bridge. Nathan moved swiftly after that. He cancelled her credit cards without warning. Ariella found out when Flora tried to fill a prescription and the payment declined. Bank glitch. Nathan claimed with a grin, waving away her concern. But Ariella had already accessed the backup statement. Idara helped her hide he'd frozen every account linked to her name, except one she kept buried in a dormant business shell. He went further still, attempting to reach out to her company's executive assistant to retrieve urgent files. When that failed, he leaked anonymous tips to a gossip blog, spinning tales of her rapid decline, suggesting the beloved tech mogul was now mentally unstable and blind beyond repair. Ariella read every headline in silence, watching her legacy bend beneath his lies. Through it all, she didn't waver. She watched, listened, collected evidence. Night after night, she played the helpless role, letting him believe she was drifting further into darkness. But her hearing sharpened, her memory stretched taut like a wire. She documented every transaction, every call, every whispered plan between him and Tari. It became her ritual. By day, she was the broken wife in designer sunglasses. By night, she was a strategist, laying traps one recording at a time. Idara's anger simmered daily, barely contained. "This man is playing with your life, Ari," she said over lunch one afternoon. "This isn't about heartbreak anymore. He's dangerous." But Ariella was calm, disturbingly so. Her grief had calcified into something colder. "He's been showing me the truth, piece by piece." Let him finish the portrait, and still the past haunted her. At odd hours, she'd retreat into memory, slipping into moments that felt like someone else's life. She saw their wedding again her in ivory lace, Nathan in a simple black tux, his eyes gleaming with tears as he promised forever. She remembered the late nights in their first apartment when money was tight and dreams were everything. How they used to stay up drawing plans on napkins and swearing they'd never let success make them strangers. He used to touch her hand just to feel her pulse, used to kiss her forehead and call her his miracle. Those memories didn't enrage her, they wrecked her. Because once upon a time, she had believed every word. But the final betrayal came quietly, one night. Long past midnight, she sat alone in her room, pretending to sleep, the recorder tucked beneath her pillow. Nathan's voice echoed through the hallway outside, casual, almost amused. "Once the house is transferred and I'm on the will," he told Tari, "I'll put her in a home, somewhere private, out of the way. Maybe she'll finally die in peace." Tari giggled. cold. She whispered. Nathan laughed. She won't even see it coming. The words gutted Ariella in a way nothing else had. Not the perfume, not the mistress, not the money. This suggestion that her death was now not just convenient but preferable. This was the moment her heart broke in full. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply sat there, knees drawn to her chest, and let the silence wrap around her like a shroud. No tears came, only stillness. But the next morning, something inside her had changed. Her silence became steel, her posture straighter, her voice, when she spoke, even softer, even calmer, to calm. The grieving woman Nathan thought he'd broken no longer existed. What remained now was a woman quietly building a reckoning. She wasn't waiting for justice anymore. She was crafting it, piece by piece, like a coder assembling the final lines of a devastating program. And when she was done, it wouldn't just be a reckoning, it would be war. The morning of the board meeting dawned clear and quiet, the Lagos skyline soft with early light. Ariella stood before her mirror, no sunglasses, no nurse, no pretense. Her eyes, still healing, still sensitive, were uncovered, sharp and filled with a clarity that had nothing to do with vision. Today was the day. For weeks, she had played her role with flawless precision. But now, it was time to end the game. Dressed in a sharply tailored black suit, her hair pulled back with clean elegance, Ariella stepped into the waiting car and rode in silence to her company's headquarters, her fingers wrapped around a slim black folder. The boardroom was full when she arrived. Executives, investors, legal counsel faces that had once shown concern now looked burdened with expectation. They had heard whispers, her condition worsening, Nathan taking control. And now she had called an emergency meeting with no explanation. When she walked in without dark glasses, without aid, the room went still. Murmurs rippled like static through the air. Ariella walked straight back to the head of the table and took her seat. There was no tremor in her voice when she spoke. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began. "I know there have been questions about my health, my leadership, and what happens next. Today, I will answer all of them." The doors opened again. Nathan walked in, his smile smug, a stack of papers in hand. He glanced at the room, then at her confusion flickering when he saw her without glasses, seated with unnerving poise. "Ari, I brought the POA and property forms," he said, raising the folder in his hand. "We should take care of them before the board meeting begins." Ariella didn't even look at him. She opened her own folder, pulling out a sleek tablet. "We are already in session, Nathan. Take a seat if you can stomach it." The first recording began to play, her voice clear, emotionless. Nathan's voice echoed through the room, unmistakable. Asterisk she can't see anymore. Ariella is nothing without her power. Just hold on, baby, soon. It'll all be ours. Gasps rose. A few board members exchanged horrified looks. The next file followed. Photos of Tari in the mansion, dressed in Ariella's robe. Bank statements showing money quietly funneled into hidden accounts. Text messages, emails, everything laid bare. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the low hum of disbelief. Nathan stood frozen, face pale, a sick smile twitching at the corners of his mouth. "This is taken out of context. She's twisting everything," he began. But Ariella finally turned her gaze on him, eyes unflinching, voice like tempered steel. "Out of context," she repeated, her tone low. "You wanted me dead, Nathan." Not metaphorically, literally. You wanted me erased. You wore my perfume on your mistress and called it compassion. You turned my illness into leverage and tried to turn my life's work into your exit strategy. She stood now, full height, full presence, radiating the quiet fury of a woman who would survive the unthinkable. You said I was nothing without power, but I gave you that power, and you used it to bury me. Alive. Nathan opened his mouth, but the security team standing by the door had already stepped forward. The board chair looked to Ariella. She gave a single nod. Nathan was escorted out, silent now, his documents slipping from his hand onto the glossy floor as he was led away. The room remained stunned as Ariella took her seat once more. She scanned the table, letting the silence settle into purpose. Effective immediately, she said, I'm taking a 3-month sabbatical. I'll be stepping back to recover. Fully, and when I return, we move forward, with renewed clarity, with new leadership protocols, and with integrity restored. She didn't mention Nathan again. She didn't need to, but the world would. That afternoon, a carefully worded press release went out. CEO Ariella Okoye would be stepping away briefly due to health reasons. Her husband, Nathan Okoye, had chosen to part ways with her during this vulnerable period. No names were dragged. No accusations were made. Just the damning implication. He left her when she was blind. The media didn't need more than that. The headlines exploded: *, wife, blinded by stress, betrayed by husband. CEO's heartbreak and comeback, the woman who saw the truth, even in darkness. Ariella didn't watch the news that night. She didn't need to. She had already seen enough. The house no longer felt like home, it felt like a mausoleum built on betrayal. Within days of the board meeting, Ariella quietly packed her essentials and left the Lekki mansion without looking back. No announcement, no confrontation, just a silent severing. Idara, precise and relentless, moved swiftly to freeze all joint assets, locking Nathan out of the accounts he had tried to siphon from. The legal team filed for divorce under irreconcilable cruelty, and with the mountain of evidence Ariella had gathered, there was little left for him to contest. By the time he realized the money had stopped flowing, so had Tari's affection. She vanished as quickly as she had arrived. No goodbye, no loyalty, no apologies. Just another parasite fleeing a dying host. But Ariella wasn't focused on revenge anymore. With the damage contained and the company secure, she turned inward. She began therapy, not just for the trauma Nathan had inflicted, but for the deeper wound she'd ignored for years, the pain of building everything alone, of being the strong one until it almost broke her. In the quiet of her therapist's office, she unpacked the layers: the childhood poverty, the pressure to succeed, the longing for family that had left her vulnerable to a man like Nathan. She cried, finally, not because of him but because she had forgotten how to grieve for herself. One grey morning, she visited her mother's grave for the first time in years. She stood there in the stillness, a single white rose in hand, and whispered everything she hadn't said in decades. I forgot who I was, Mama, she said through tears, but I remember now. I remember who you raised. In that moment, the ache inside her shifted, no longer a hollow pain, but a quiet resolve. When Ariella returned to the office 3 months later, it wasn't just her presence that surprised her. Staff, it was her spirit. She wore a soft yellow blouse that caught the sunlight through the glass windows. Her hair framed her face, no longer tight and severe, but loose and graceful. She smiled as she walked through the doors, and the applause that greeted her wasn't orchestrated or polite till it was real. Her team stood to their feet, not just out of respect, but in awe. Their leader was back, not broken, not dimmed, but transformed. She moved through the office like a woman reintroduced to her own power meeting, with teams cracking light jokes, asking questions not from pressure but from genuine curiosity. She wasn't driven by fear anymore. She was building again, but this time, not for validation, not for love, not for someone else, just for herself. Meanwhile, Nathan's fall from grace was swift and brutal. As Ariella's legal filings became public, more details emerged. The financial manipulation, the leaked documents, the false medical stories fed to tabloids. Investors who had once shaken his hand now distanced themselves. His real estate ventures crumbled under scrutiny. He faced charges for attempted fraud, and the tabloids that once hinted at his victimhood now painted him as a calculating opportunist who betrayed his blind wife for profit. His name became synonymous with scandal. One day, months later, assistant handed her a note. It was brief, just 6 words in a familiar handwriting. Asterisk, please, forgive me. I was lost. She read it once. Then again, her hands didn't tremble. Her heart didn't stir. She placed the note into a drawer without a word and never replied. Some ghosts don't deserve resurrection. Ariella stood at her office window that evening, Lagos glowing beneath her, the hum of life buzzing far below. She had lost so much, but she had reclaimed everything that mattered. Her voice, her peace, herself. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt free. The sun dipped low over the lagoon, casting molten gold across the surface of the water as it rippled gently beneath the breeze. Ariella sat beneath a jacaranda tree, a soft shawl draped over her shoulders, a leather-bound journal open in her lap. Her pen moved slowly, thoughtfully, each word written with the deliberation of someone who had learned to listen to herself again. Beside her, Idara sat cross-legged on the blanket, sipping from a flask of hibiscus tea, her presence quiet but grounding as she had always been. They didn't speak much, they didn't need to. The silence between them was full, comfortable, earned. Above them, the sky shifted into a gradient of lavender and orange, the city at their backs, the water wide and endless before them. Ariella paused her writing, staring out across the horizon. Her features were relaxed, almost serene. She was no longer the tightly wound woman who had once fought to be seen, to be chosen, to be safe. She was simply herself, whole and finally healed. A breeze stirred, rustling the pages of her journal, and she smiled faintly. Her voice rose softly in narration, as if spoken into the wind. Sometimes blindness isn't a condition, it's a choice. And once I opened my eyes, I never closed them again. The final light of the day danced across the water, and as Ariella closed her journal, she exhaled not from exhaustion, but from release. Behind her was pain, betrayal, survival. Before her, possibility. And for the first time in a long, long time, she didn't just believe in peace, she felt it.